She canceled my credit card at 8 in the morning. By 8 that night, she found out exactly who she'd just made that mistake with. My name is Gloria Caldwell. I'm 67 years old. I want to tell you what happened at my son's Thanksgiving dinner, because I think a lot of women my age have been in a version of that room. Sitting at the end of the table, watching someone smile while they dismantle your life and call a help. I'm not a complicated woman. I worked with my hands for 30 years. I raised my son alone after my husband passed. I wore the same gray flannel shirt to 3 different family dinners and nobody said anything because nobody thought I was worth dressing for. That was fine. I was busy doing other things. Randall's house sits in a quiet suburb outside Pittsburgh. One of those neighborhoods where every lawn is the same length and the mailboxes all match. It took him 10 years of steady work to get there, and I was proud of him for it. That Thursday, the driveway was packed. His in-laws' Buick, a cousin's pickup, a neighbor who got invited for drinks and somehow ended up staying through dessert. Inside it smelled like turkey and store-bought pie and someone's perfume working too hard. Football on in the other room. Kids running the hallway. Normal Thanksgiving sounds, but underneath all of it, if you knew how to listen, something else was humming. Something that had been planned. I arrived at 4. Nadine met me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, took my coat without asking, and pointed me toward the far end of the table, not the head, the other end, near the kitchen door where it's drafty and the chair wobbles. I sat down without saying anything about it. Nadine was 5 months pregnant. Glowing, the way people say, and she really was. Confident. Dressed like she was hosting something that would be photographed. She had planned every detail of that dinner down to the folded napkins and where each person sat. I know that now. I suspected it then. Every smile was placed. Every word was rehearsed. She wasn't hosting a dinner. She was running an operation. My son Randall, 43 years old, sat beside her. He had the look of a man who'd been agreeing with someone for too long, not unhappy exactly, just worn down to a shape that wasn't quite his. Dinner moved along. Conversation happened around me more than with me. When I tried to say something about the pirates, Nadine shifted the topic, and the table followed her like water follows a tilt. Randall watched his plate. I watched everything. Then, halfway through the meal, Nadine stood up. She tapped her glass with a spoon. One clean sound. The room went quiet the way it does for people who expect to be listened to. I just want to say something before dessert, she said. Calm voice. Practiced. The voice of someone who had run this moment in her head more than once, who had timed it, staged it, chosen the audience deliberately. With the baby coming, Randall and I have done a lot of thinking. About responsibility. About structure. About making sure this family is protected going forward. She paused. Looked around the table. Let it settle like sediment. Starting today, I'll be managing the finances for this family. All of them. We've already taken the first steps. Nods moved around the table. Someone said, that makes sense. She's organized. Another, good. Someone should be in charge. Then she looked at me. Gloria, she said, first name, soft voice, the tone people use when they've already buried you and want it to look like a kindness. We took care of your accounts this morning. Your credit card has been canceled. At your age, you really shouldn't have to manage all that stress. If you need anything, just ask Randall. Randall nodded.
He did not look at me.
Glasses lifted around the table. A cousin said, smart move. Older people get taken advantage of all the time. Someone else. That's responsible planning. I looked at my hands, flat on the tablecloth. They were steady. I noticed that, and kept it. I set my glass down. Stood up slow. My left knee has complained since a job site fall in 2009. I stood straight anyway. I looked at my son. Randall, I said. You really don't know, do you? His smile disappeared. The table went quiet again. Different kind of quiet. The kind that descends right before something irreversible happens, the second before the fault line moves, when every person in the room feels it in their chest before their mind catches up. To explain what happened next, I have to go back almost 30 years. February 1995. Pittsburgh in winter is a specific kind of cold. Comes off the rivers, gets into the buildings, gets into you. Thomas had been sick for 3 years. Breast cancer, the aggressive kind. Yes, it happens to men too, though nobody talks about it the way they should. He fought it without complaining, without making it the center of every room he walked into. That was his way. Quiet stubbornness. I loved that about him from the beginning. He died on a Tuesday. Randall was 14. I was 38. I remember the drive home from the hospital. Ice on the parkway, going slow. I passed an exit I'd taken 100 times and didn't recognize it for a second. My brain was running on something other than thinking. Just keeping the car on the road. One exit at a time. I kept thinking, get home before Randall gets back from school. Get home, get your face right, figure out what to say. That was the only goal. Not grief, not the future, just get home and be upright when he walks through the door. He was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, peanut butter sandwich in front of him. No jelly, the way he'd always had it. He looked up and said, "Is he gone?" I said yes. He nodded, took a bite of his sandwich. I sat across from him. Neither of us said much. Thomas had been the one who made conversation easy. Without him, Randall and I were just two quiet people in a house that had gotten too large and too still overnight. The bills started arriving the following week. Hospital costs, funeral expenses, a second mortgage notice. Thomas and I had refinanced 3 years earlier to cover his first round of treatment, and the payments didn't stop because he did. Then a letter from the union hall saying my hours at the industrial plant were being cut due to a contract restructure. 3 envelopes in 1 week. I sat at the kitchen table that Saturday night with all 3 letters spread out in front of me and a cup of coffee that went cold while I read them. Randall was asleep down the hall. The house was quiet. The furnace clicked on and off. Outside, snow was coming down slow and steady the way it does in Pittsburgh in February, like it has nowhere to be and all the time in the world. I sat there for a long time. The darkness in that kitchen pressed in close. Then I made a decision. The only real decision I think I've ever made in my life. I was not going to fall apart. Not because I didn't have the right to. I had every right. But Randall needed someone upright, and I was the only candidate left. So I picked up the letters, stacked them neatly, put them in a folder, and went to bed. One thing at a time. Starting tomorrow. I was an electrician. Industrial work, load panels, 3-phase systems, the wiring that runs factories and warehouses. It wrecks your sleep and puts calluses on your hands and some of the fume exposure you don't want to think about too hard. But I was good at it. I understood how systems failed and how to make them reliable again. What I didn't understand was money beyond a paycheck. That changed because of a man named Clyde Hutchins. About 6 months after Thomas passed, I took a Saturday job at a warehouse in Monroeville. A loading dock panel had shorted out and nobody would touch it because the previous electrician had wired it badly and left something that looked dangerous behind. It was dangerous. I fixed it in 4 hours, traced the fault back to a corroded junction box that should have been replaced 3 years earlier, rewired the downstream connections, and tested everything twice before I packed up my tools. Clyde owned the building. He was 63, retired from running logistics for a regional distribution company, and he watched me work the entire time without saying a word. When I finished, he said, "You don't just fix the problem. You figure out what caused it." We talked for 2 hours in that parking lot. Cold afternoon, neither of us moved to leave. Clyde told me how he'd bought his first property, a storage building near Turtle Creek that had a compromised roof and a drainage problem nobody wanted to deal with. He bought it cheap because of those 2 things. Fixed the roof himself over 4 weekends. Fixed the drainage over 2 more. Rented it to a machine parts supplier on a 2-year lease. Used that income to cover a loan on his second property. Repeated the process. He explained depreciation schedules, LLC structures, how to read a commercial lease from both sides of the table at the same time, how the best properties weren't the ones that looked good, they were the ones with solvable problems that everyone else was walking away from because most people couldn't solve them and you could. He didn't offer me money, didn't offer to partner. He just talked the way experienced people sometimes talk to younger ones when they see something worth not wasting. I listened the way I'd learned to listen on job sites, not reacting, just taking it in. I drove home that night and wrote down everything he'd said on a legal pad. Both sides, small handwriting. 6 months later, I bought my first property. A narrow commercial unit in Swissvale, one of those Pittsburgh neighborhoods that used to be industrial and was now just tired and waiting. The unit had been vacant for 14 months. The listing had expired twice. Roof leaked in 2 places, back door had warped in its frame and wouldn't close right, and the previous tenant had left behind broken equipment, a busted floor drain, and a smell that took 3 weeks of ventilation to clear out. I paid $31,000 for it. Private loan through a small credit union where the branch manager knew my work history and could verify my union wages. The terms weren't ideal, but they were workable if I got a tenant in at the right number. I fixed it myself. Nights after shifts. Saturdays. The occasional Sunday, when Randall had something going on at school and the house was empty. I rewired the entire panel. Patched the roof over 2 cold weekends in March, working with shingles that went brittle in the temperature and hands that stiffened up after an hour. Fixed the drain. Painted the interior with a roller and a $40 tray from the hardware store. Repaired the back door frame with wood filler and 2 replacement hinges that cost me $8 total. Randall was 15 that year. Some Saturdays he'd come out to the unit and hand me tools without being asked. We'd work a few hours without talking much. I'd buy him a burger on the way home. That was about the shape of US those years. Not distant, just quiet. 2 people who showed up for each other without needing to announce it. 4 months after the purchase, I rented the unit to a small auto parts distributor on a 24-month lease at $1,400 a month. Covered my loan payment with $210 left over every month. I remember sitting on the concrete floor of that unit the night before the tenant moved in. Bare walls, 1 overhead light buzzing faintly, cold coming through the repaired door frame. I sat there maybe 20 minutes without thinking about much. Just sitting in something I'd built from a problem nobody else wanted to solve. I thought about Thomas. He would have called me stubborn. Then he would have told me to eat something and get some sleep. The second unit came 18 months later. Braddock, another post-industrial neighborhood, another building with solvable problems. $44,500. Foundation drainage issue. 2 windows needing replacement. Electrical upgrade. Rented to a contractor supply company at $1,800 a month. Then the third. Then the fourth. In 2008, I formed Caldwell Industrial Holdings LLC with the help of a Pittsburgh attorney named Floyd Mercer, recommended by a union colleague, methodical, not a man who wasted words. Floyd restructured my ownership, reviewed my leases, and advised me to keep my personal finances entirely separate from the LLC.
I did.
By then, I owned 4 properties generating steady income. My name barely appeared in public records. I still worked union jobs. Still drove the same truck. Still wore the same clothes. Randall graduated college that year. He thought he'd gotten a partial scholarship. The balance had been paid through a trust account he'd never seen. He thanked me for helping with groceries during exam week. I said, "You did the work," which was true. The 5th property, a commercial storage complex in eastern Ohio near the Pennsylvania line, came in 2012. Portfolio by then, $2.84 million combined valuation. Net rental income averaging $22,000 a month. I retired in 2017 because my knee finally gave me a legitimate reason to stop. I never told Randall any of it. Not because I was ashamed. Because I'd watched what happened to people who knew money was coming, how it made them wait instead of build, expect instead of earn. I wanted Randall to work because he had to make decisions because they mattered, to become the kind of man who would have been fine either way. He became that man. Until Nadine started quietly rewriting the story. I met Nadine for the first time at a cookout Randall threw in the summer of 2014. She was 24, sharp, quick to laugh at the right moments. She had the kind of social intelligence that looks like warmth until you've watched it operate long enough to see what it actually is. Reading the room, calculating responses, deciding who matters and who doesn't before the introductions are finished. She shook my hand, called me Mrs. Caldwell, and spent about 5 seconds scanning my living room before she had me filed away somewhere in her mental categories. I recognized the move, because it's what I did too, just with buildings instead of people. They married in 2016. I gave them a check that covered 3 months of mortgage payments, framed as a home repair fund. No strings. No conditions. The shift started maybe a year into the marriage. Subtle enough that I almost missed it. Subtle the way a slow gas leak is subtle. By the time most people smell it, the room is already compromised. Randall called less. Not dramatically, just the difference between weekly and every 2 weeks, then once a month. When I brought it up, he said Nadine was tired, work was busy, life was full. All reasonable explanations. I let it go. Then came what I came to think of as the concern offensive. Nadine started asking questions that sounded like caring. Did I have a plan for the future? Was I managing okay on my own? Had I looked into senior financial planning services? Were my accounts set up properly in case something happened to me? Randall repeated versions of these questions when we talked, in slightly different words. The phrasing was close enough to hers that it stopped sounding like his own thinking. He was an echo of a plan I hadn't been shown yet. He started showing up at my house with printed articles about financial scams targeting retirees, all of them highlighted in yellow. He'd set them on my kitchen table and say, "She just worries about you, Moem. She reads a lot." I started paying closer attention. Then came the visits that felt like inspections. Nadine and Randall dropping by together, supposedly just to check in. She'd glance at the mail on my counter. Ask casual questions about my Medicare card. "Are you keeping up with everything? It must be a lot to manage alone." She commented on the neighborhood once. "Do you still feel safe here at night, Gloria? Things have changed around here." I'd lived in that house for 22 years. I knew every neighbor by name. Half of them I'd helped with something at one point or another. A tripped breaker, a bad outlet, a furnace that wouldn't fire up in January. I said nothing. I kept watching. The next move came in September. Randall called to ask if I'd consider signing a limited emergency authorization, just so he could help with banking if something happened. He said it casually, like it was a routine thing. I said I'd think about it. 2 weeks later, he showed up at my house with a document that Nadine had apparently printed and partially filled out already. I looked it over, said I'd have my attorney review it, and put it in the kitchen drawer. Nadine's calls to Randall that evening ran about 90 minutes, based on the timestamps I saw on his phone when he left it on my counter going to the bathroom. I called Floyd Mercer the next morning. Not to act yet, just to make sure he knew the situation. Floyd listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You want to wait, or you want to move?" "Wait," I said. "Not yet." "All right," he said.
Tell me when.
Then one Tuesday morning in October, I was at a hardware store in Bethel Park, buying a $14 pressure fitting for my garage compressor. Simple errand, 10 minutes. The cashier ran my card. Declined. She tried again. Same result. She handed it back without making a production of it. I paid cash, thanked her, drove home. I called the bank from my kitchen. A representative explained that the account had been placed under a restriction at the request of an authorized contact. That contact was Randall Caldwell, who had submitted a form citing concerns about elder financial vulnerability. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment, put it down on the counter, looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, the yard where Randall used to catch fireflies in July, where I'd set up a sprinkler on hot afternoons when he was small, where Thomas used to sit on the back step in the evenings when the weather was good. Then I picked the phone back up and called Floyd. "It's time," I said. "I'll need 6 weeks," he said. "You've got them." Over the next 6 weeks, Floyd prepared a complete documentation package. Every property deed, current appraisals from 3 certified firms, all 5 lease agreements, 12 years of LLC financial statements, bound and tapped. A legal analysis confirming that the emergency authorization Randall had signed was unenforceable against any asset held by Caldwell Industrial Holdings LLC, which predated the marriage by 6 years and was structured entirely outside Randall's legal reach. Floyd's office also logged every account access attempt made against my personal accounts during those 6 weeks.
Dates, times,
Amounts requested, all of it documented and timestamped. A paper trail thick enough to bury whatever story Nadine had been writing. I called Randall twice during that period. Normal conversations. How's work? How's Nadine feeling? How's the nursery coming along? Said nothing about the accounts. Said nothing about Floyd. Kept everything ordinary. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. Fixed the compressor in my garage. Watched the Pirates lose, which wasn't hard to get used to. I waited. Back to that table. Nadine had just finished her announcement. My credit card was gone. My son had nodded along. The table was approving. And I had just stood up and asked Randall if he knew. The room was waiting. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. Dialed Floyd.
"You can come in now."
"Who is that?" Nadine asked. The practiced warmth had dropped out of her voice completely. What replaced it was harder, colder. "My attorney." Randall pushed back his chair. "MOM, what are you?" The front door opened. Floyd Mercer walked in wearing a dark jacket, carrying the leather briefcase he'd had since before I'd known him. Gray at the temples, reading glasses in his breast pocket, the unhurried walk of a man who has been in enough rooms to know he doesn't need to perform anything. He stepped through that door, and the temperature of every person in that room dropped by 3 degrees. "Good evening," he said. He set the briefcase on the dining table, right in the center, between the turkey platter and the cranberry dish and the matching plates Nadine had ordered specially for the occasion, and opened it. The sound the latches made was quiet, precise, final. Folders.
Deeds.
Certified appraisals. 12 years of LLC financial statements, bound and tapped. The room had gone completely still. Nobody was eating. The football game in the other room sounded very far away, like noise from another world that no longer applied. Floyd opened the first folder and spoke without emphasis. Just facts, delivered clean, like a blade that doesn't announce itself until the damage is done. Gloria Caldwell is the sole member of Caldwell Industrial Holdings LLC, formed in Pennsylvania in 2008. The LLC holds title to 5 commercial properties across Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio. Current combined appraised value is $2.84 million. Nadine laughed, short, sharp, the sound of someone buying time. That's not possible. Floyd slid a document across the table toward Randall. Monthly net rental income averages $22,000. All accounts current. No outstanding debt on any of the 5 properties. Randall picked up the paper, set it down, picked it up again. His hands were not steady. Floyd placed a second document on the table. The emergency financial authorization signed by Randall Caldwell in October does not extend to assets held by the LLC. It is unenforceable as written. All personal account access restrictions have been reversed as of this morning. He set down a third page, face up, so the heading was visible to everyone seated. All account access attempts made between October 14th and November 28th have been logged and documented by legal counsel. No criminal referral is being made at this time. This will remain the case provided there are no further unauthorized attempts to access or restrict Mrs. Caldwell's finances. He closed the briefcase. The sound it made was the same as before. Quiet. Precise. Final. He straightened his jacket. That concludes the summary. He walked back out the front door. Quiet as he came in. The door didn't slam. It didn't need to. The room stayed still for a long moment. Nobody looked at anyone else. The kids had gone silent in the hallway without being told to. The air had the quality of a room where something has just been detonated, all the heat gone, everything rearranged, nobody certain what the ground looks like now. Nadine was the first to speak. Her voice had changed, stripped of the careful warmth she'd been wearing all evening. What was underneath wasn't cruelty. It was something I recognized.
Fear.
The specific kind that comes from growing up without enough and spending your adult life making sure that never happens again.
You hid all of this, she said.
All these years. You watched US struggle and you sat on this. I looked at her steadily. I never told you anything. That's different from hiding. It's the same thing. No, I said. It's not. You made decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent. That is not the same thing as what I did. She didn't answer that. Randall looked up from the documents. His eyes were red. Why didn't you tell me? Any of it? I sat back down in the wobbly chair at the drafty end of the table. Because I wanted you to become who you are without my money shaping the decisions you made, I said. You did that. You became a man who works, who shows up, who handles things. I'm proud of that. But somewhere in the last 2 years, you let someone convince you that I was a problem to be managed. And you used your name to take away my access to my own accounts. That's what I can't let go of easily, Randall. Not the money.
That.
He had no answer. The room didn't either. Nadine picked up her coat from the back of her chair. She said something I won't repeat here. Walked to the door and left. It closed behind her with a sound that carried longer than it should have. Longer than physics explained. The sound of something ending. The family cleared out quickly after that. Apologies muttered near the door. Cars backing out of the driveway one by one. Nadine's mother left without looking in my direction. The neighbor who'd stayed for dinner slipped out somewhere in the middle of it all. When the house was empty, Randall sat at the table with the documents in front of him. I stayed in my chair at the far end. The football game was still on in the other room. Nobody turned it off. We sat there a while, without talking. That was fine. We'd always been better at sitting than talking. He stayed with me for 3 weeks after that. Slept in his old room, same twin bed, same window looking out over the backyard. Went to work every day, came home, sat at my kitchen table. Some nights we watched the game. Some nights we just sat. We talked more in those 3 weeks than in the previous 3 years. Some of it was about Nadine, how the shift had happened so gradually he hadn't seen it building. Some of it was about Thomas, things he'd never known because he'd been 14 when he died, and there are questions a 14-year-old doesn't think to ask. Some of it was just ordinary. A problem he'd been sitting on at work. The compressor in my garage. The pirates, which neither of us had much hope for anymore. One evening, he started to apologize and I told him to stop. I didn't want the apology. I wanted him to understand what had happened clearly enough that he'd recognize it if it came at him again from a different direction. He listened the way he used to when he was young, and I was showing him how something worked. That was enough for me. He met with his own attorney. Worked through the separation, the house, the shared finances, what responsibility for the baby looked like going forward. He moved through it one step at a time without running from any of it. My grandson was born the following April. His name is Theodore.
Teddy.
He's got Thomas's coloring, which still catches me off guard sometimes when the light is right. I held him in that hospital room, and the rest of it went quiet. He was just a kid who needed the people around him to be straight with each other. That was the whole job now. I set up a trust for him the same week he came home. Floyd drew it up clean, No access before 25, distributed across education, a first property, and a reserve fund in that order. When Teddy's old enough, I'll sit down with him and explain exactly where it came from. Every property. Every night I worked after he was asleep. Every decision made one step at a time. I helped Nadine clear one of her larger debt accounts, on condition she completed a structured financial counseling program and maintained a monthly budget reviewed by a neutral third party for 2 years. Not charity. Not punishment. A foundation, the same way Clyde Hutchins gave me one. Knowledge and structure, not a handout. Some people in the family thought I was too easy on her. I wasn't being easy. I was being precise about what actually helps and what just feels satisfying. These days, I still drive the F-150. Still wear the gray flannel shirt. Last spring, I fixed the garage compressor. $14 part, 45 minutes. Randall sat on a bucket the whole time and asked questions. That was a good afternoon. I'm telling this story because I think there are a lot of women my age sitting at the end of tables, being managed, being handled, being spoken about in the third person while they're still in the room. Most of them have more to stand on than anyone realizes. And the silence they've kept, the same silence that built everything, is being used as evidence that they're empty. IT isn't evidence of that. It never was. 5 things, one woman to another. 1. Quiet is a strategy, not a weakness. But you have to be the one choosing it. 2. Structure your assets before someone else decides to do it for you. An LLC isn't just for corporations. A trust isn't just for wealthy families. Get a Floyd. 3. Your kids need to see you stand up. Not for the money. For the principle of a woman not being made invisible in her own life. 4. The people who move on what they think they can take will always show you who they are if you wait long enough. 5. Real patience isn't waiting because you have no choice. It's waiting because you know exactly what you're waiting for. I knew. And when the moment came, I was ready. Because here's what Nadine never understood, and what a lot of people never understand about quiet women. The ones who say the least have usually been paying attention the longest. And when a woman who has been paying attention for 28 years finally decides to speak, she doesn't need to raise her voice.